Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said she wasn't in the mood for intimacy this month. I said I wasn't in the mood for marriage this year. Her eyes stopped rolling. That moment didn't happen in a bedroom. It happened at the kitchen island, under white lights that made everything look clean even when it wasn't. She was scrolling on her phone, half listening, already somewhere else. I remember thinking how practiced she looked at being unavailable, like it was a skill she'd polished over time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just let the sentence land. The silence after it was heavier than any fight we'd ever had. My name is Mark. I own a small logistics company just outside the city. Nothing flashy. Trucks, schedules, margins. I built it slow, with systems and patience. Control wasn't about power for me. It was about predictability. Knowing where things stood. Claire used to like that about me. Or at least she said she did. She worked in marketing, lived on metrics that changed weekly, and needed constant feedback from the outside world to feel steady on the inside. Lately, that feedback didn't come from me. It came from meetings that ran long, lunches she didn't invite me to, and mornings that started earlier than they needed to. Every Tuesday, she said she was grabbing coffee for work. Always the same place. Starbucks, 2 exits off the highway. She never brought anything home. No cup, no receipt. Just energy that didn't belong to our house. At Applebee's, during a team lunch a few weeks earlier, I noticed something I couldn't unsee. The way Ethan, my operations manager, leaned in when she spoke. The way she lowered her voice just for him. It wasn't romantic. It was efficient. Familiar. Like people who had already crossed lines and didn't need to announce it. I had hired Ethan myself. Trained him. Promoted him. Gave him access because I trusted structure more than instinct. That night, after the sentence about marriage, Claire laughed like I was joking. Then she saw my face and stopped. For the first time in a long while, she didn't know where she stood. I went to bed without saying anything else. Not because I was confused. Because I was already moving. Not away. Just out of reach. The first real confirmation didn't come from her. It never does. It came from someone who had no reason to lie and no interest in drama. 2 days after that kitchen conversation, my office manager asked if I was coming to the Applebee's lunch that Friday. She said it casually, like it was routine. Then she paused and added that Claire and Ethan had already confirmed. Together. Again. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. I started noticing patterns once I allowed myself to look. Not emotionally. Logically. The way I do with numbers when something doesn't add up, but hasn't collapsed yet. Claire's mornings had changed. She left earlier, dressed sharper, moved faster. She said the market was demanding more presence. I didn't question it. I adjusted my schedule instead. From a distance, it probably looked like support. On Tuesdays, when she said she had Starbucks meetings, Ethan's calendar mysteriously blocked out the same hour. That detail sat quietly in my head. No reaction. No confrontation. Just stored. At home, she grew lighter. Not happier. Lighter. Less anchored. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She forgot small routines we'd had for years. When I spoke, she nodded without absorbing. When I stayed quiet, she didn't notice. One evening, I suggested we do our usual Costco run together on the weekend. It had become a habit over the years. Groceries, household stuff, an hour of neutral conversation. She said she was busy and suggested I go alone. Her tone wasn't cold. It was efficient, like reallocating resources. That was the moment something inside me clicked into place. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. At work, Ethan had started overstepping, speaking for me in meetings, making decisions that technically required my sign-off. No one questioned it because it seemed like trust. I let it continue, not as a test, as a measurement. Claire stopped asking about my day. Stopped asking about anything that didn't involve optics. How we looked. How things sounded. How it all appeared from the outside. That night, she watched Hulu in the living room while I reviewed reports at the dining table. Same space. Different worlds. She didn't ask me to sit with her. I didn't offer. I wasn't being pushed out. I was being replaced. And the worst part wasn't that she thought I wouldn't notice. It was that she thought I wouldn't move. I didn't go looking for proof the way people imagine. There was no late-night spying, no dramatic phone grabbing. I already had access to everything that mattered. That's the thing about trust in business. It leaves trails. Our systems were shared. Scheduling software, internal chat, expense reports. I had built them myself. I didn't need to break in. I just needed to stop assuming the best. The first thing I noticed was expense timing. Coffee charges that matched those Tuesday mornings. Same location. Same hour. Starbucks again. Always 2 drinks. Never reimbursed through the company. Personal cards. Personal pattern. Then I checked internal messages. Nothing explicit. That was almost impressive. Short updates. Logistics talk. But the frequency was wrong. Too casual for professionals. Too constant for necessity. People don't message that often unless they're avoiding talking in front of others. I didn't feel anything when I saw it. Not yet. Emotion would have been a distraction. What shifted everything was the calendar sync. Claire had access to some of our internal planning because she liked to stay informed. I had allowed it years ago, thinking transparency was harmless. I filtered by overlap. Her free hours aligned perfectly with Ethan's unscheduled gaps. Like a puzzle someone hadn't bothered to hide because they assumed no one would look closely. At Applebee's the following Friday, I watched them without watching them. The way Ethan waited for her reaction before speaking. The way she leaned back when he talked, relaxed in a way she hadn't been with me in months. There was no affection, just coordination. That's when I understood it wasn't about romance. It was about access, familiarity. The comfort of someone who didn't challenge her position, only reinforced it. That night, she sat on the couch, Hulu playing in the background, scrolling through her phone. I stood in the hallway and watched her for a second longer than usual. She didn't look up. I went into my office instead and started making changes. Quiet ones. Delegations rerouted. Decision points moved away from Ethan. Reporting structures adjusted so information flowed around him, not through him. At home, I changed nothing. Same tone. Same routines. Same absence of conflict. Claire didn't sense the shift because she was too busy enjoying the illusion of control. The evidence was enough. More than enough. I didn't need to confront her. Confrontation would have given her something to push against. An enemy. A narrative. What I needed was space. Not distance she could see. Distance she could feel. And the moment she realized something was missing, she wouldn't know where to look. Because I hadn't left. I had simply stopped standing where she expected me to be. I didn't vanish overnight. That would have been theatrical. Obvious. Too easy to explain away. What I did instead was remove myself in layers. The same way you shut down a system without triggering alarms. The first thing I changed was my schedule. I stopped coming home at the same time. Not later. Earlier some days. Other days, not at all. I told her I had operational issues to resolve. Which was true. Just not in the way she assumed. She noticed the absence before she noticed the reason. Dinners became optional. Conversations became summaries. I answered questions with conclusions instead of explanations. That shift bothered her more than silence would have. She was used to my availability, not my efficiency. One evening she suggested we do the Costco run together like we always used to. Her tone was casual, but the timing was wrong. It came after 2 days of unanswered messages and 1 missed call she didn't acknowledge missing. I told her I had already taken care of it. She looked confused. Not upset. Confused. As if a shared ritual had disappeared without permission. At work, I started delegating through layers that didn't include Ethan. I wasn't cutting him out. I was routing around him. Meetings he used to dominate became optional for me. I attended remotely. Sometimes not at all. Decisions still happened. Just not in rooms where he could watch me. That's when Claire started asking where I was. Not emotionally. Logistically. She wanted to know my schedule. My return time. My plans. I answered politely. Vaguely. The same way she had answered me for months. At home, she filled the silence with Hulu. The TV stayed on longer. Louder. Like background noise could replace presence. I worked from my office or stayed out late, sitting in my car, reviewing reports, letting the distance settle. She started texting more. Not accusations. Check-ins. Soft pings designed to re-establish connection without addressing the gap. I didn't ignore them. I responded just slowly enough to break the rhythm. The first time she realized something was wrong wasn't when I didn't come to bed. It was when she couldn't predict me. That uncertainty spread fast. She stopped mentioning Ethan around me. Stopped mentioning work altogether. As if removing words could restore balance. But the structure had already shifted. I hadn't disappeared. I had become unavailable in a way she couldn't confront. And that was the moment she started losing control. The move against Ethan wasn't personal. That's what made it effective. I didn't need revenge. I needed gravity to do its job once I stopped holding things in place. I started by pulling myself out of the daily operations he was used to leaning on. I approved fewer things directly. I let processes run without my presence. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted to see what happened when no one was watching closely. The first cracks showed up fast. Missed deadlines. Small ones. Then coordination errors. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough friction to force attention. Clients didn't complain loudly. They simply started asking more questions. And questions are dangerous when answers depend on one person improvising. At Applebee's, during one of the team lunches I stopped attending, someone mentioned that Ethan seemed stretched thin. That word reached me without effort. I didn't respond. I logged it. Claire sensed the shift before he did. Her tone at home changed. Less confident. More probing. She asked about the company more often, then caught herself and pivoted to safer topics. She was trying to recalibrate without knowing which way the floor had tilted. Ethan, meanwhile, started making small mistakes in front of people who mattered. He spoke out of turn. Overpromised. Took credit too early. Without my quiet corrections, his edges showed. I didn't expose him. I didn't warn him. I simply allowed the structure to reveal what it had been compensating for. One afternoon, I saw a Starbucks charge on a company-adjacent account that shouldn't have been used. It wasn't large. It wasn't dramatic. But it was sloppy. The kind of thing that happens when someone feels untouchable. I forwarded it to accounting with a neutral note asking for clarification. That was it. No confrontation. No accusation. Just a question placed in the system. By the end of the week, I heard that his authority was being quietly reviewed. Not revoked. Reviewed. That word changes how people look at you. At home, Claire stopped mentioning work entirely. She watched Hulu longer. Stayed up later. Asked me questions she didn't finish. She could feel something collapsing, but she couldn't see the shape of it yet. Neither of them understood the same thing. I wasn't attacking. I was stepping aside. And once I did, the imbalance they had been standing on started to tilt on its own. All I had to do was stay still and let it happen. The shift became visible the moment other people started adjusting their behavior around her. Not confronting. Not accusing. Just recalibrating. Social pressure never announces itself. It shows up in pauses, in who gets included, in who stops being asked. It started at work. I wasn't there when it happened, which made it cleaner. A team lunch at Applebee's, the same one I used to attend without thinking. Claire showed up late. Ethan was already there. The room quieted for half a second longer than normal. No one said anything. But no one filled the space either. From what I heard later, conversations redirected away from them. Not sharply. Gently. Like water flowing around an obstacle. Someone mentioned a missed delivery. Someone else asked who had signed off. The question wasn't aggressive. It was public. Ethan answered too fast. Claire stayed quiet. That silence mattered. By the following week, Claire noticed she wasn't being looped in the way she used to be. Not invited to informal discussions. Not asked for opinions she once volunteered freely. Her value had always been tied to proximity and perception. Both were slipping. At home, she tried to reassert presence. Asked about my day again. Suggested small routines we hadn't touched in months. I didn't reject them. I acknowledged them without engaging. She couldn't tell if I was distant or simply done. One morning, she left early for another Starbucks meeting that wasn't officially scheduled. She dressed carefully. Too carefully. When she came back, the confidence she'd left with hadn't returned. Later that evening, she paced while Hulu played in the background, barely watched. She asked me if something was wrong at the company. I told her things were adjusting. That was all. The word unsettled her. She reached out to friends. Not to vent. To check temperature. Responses came slower. Shorter. People were polite, but unavailable. That's how isolation begins. Not with rejection. With neutral distance. Ethan's name stopped coming up entirely. Not because he wasn't there. Because people didn't want to attach themselves to uncertainty. Claire felt it before she understood it. She had always believed attention was permanent once earned. She was learning it was conditional. And for the first time since this began, she realized I wasn't the only one stepping back. The room had changed. And she was standing in it alone, trying to remember when that happened. Isolation doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in when the noise you relied on stops responding to you. Claire felt it in fragments at first. Unreturned messages. Meetings that didn't need her input. Evenings that stretched longer than they used to. She started watching Hulu earlier in the night. like she needed the sound to prove the house wasn't empty. I stayed in my office or came home late, not avoiding her, just not orbiting her anymore. The difference mattered. She tried to anchor herself to me again. Not emotionally. Practically. She asked where I'd be the next day, what time I'd get back, whether I'd be home for dinner. Questions framed as logistics, but loaded with something else underneath. I answered them all. Calmly. Briefly. Without detail. That was when she realized I was still present, but no longer reachable. At work, she began losing small privileges she'd assumed were permanent. Access to information. Informal authority. People didn't challenge her, they simply stopped checking in. The space she once filled adjusted around her absence without resistance. Ethan stopped texting her as often. Not because he wanted to. Because he couldn't afford to be seen doing it. His position had become fragile. Fragile people reduce exposure. She noticed. One night, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me work in silence. Not to connect. To observe. I could feel her recalculating. Trying to figure out when I had changed. The truth was I hadn't changed at all. I had returned to myself. Weekends became mine again. I spent hours at Home Depot, not buying anything urgent. Just walking aisles, organizing plans, restoring order where I could touch it. No one rushed me. No one needed anything from me there. When I came home, she asked what I'd done. I said I'd taken care of things. That phrase started to bother her. She tried to provoke emotion. Subtle comments. References to shared history. Even hints of vulnerability. I acknowledged them without stepping closer. She didn't want closeness. She wanted access. And access was gone. For the first time since we'd been married, she couldn't pull me back with routine, silence, or familiarity. She couldn't create urgency because I wasn't reacting. That scared her more than anger ever would have. She was alone in the house with me, and she could feel the distance growing, even though I hadn't moved an inch. The confrontation didn't come the way she had rehearsed it in her head. There was no raised voice, no dramatic reveal, no single moment she could point to and say this is where everything broke. It arrived quietly, the way truth usually does when it's already late. She waited until a night when I came home earlier than expected. I could tell by the way the lights were on, and the house was too still. She had been waiting, not pacing, sitting, focused. She asked if we could talk. Not about us. About what was happening. I sat down. I didn't brace myself. I didn't prepare arguments. I just listened. She spoke carefully at first, circling the issue instead of naming it. She said I felt distant, that things felt unstable, that she didn't recognize the rhythm anymore. She asked if I was unhappy. I told her I was clear. That answer unsettled her more than silence would have. She tried again, this time closer. She said she felt like she was losing me, that she didn't know where she stood. Her voice softened on purpose. It was a tactic that had worked before. I told her I hadn't gone anywhere. That was when she finally looked at me instead of through me. She asked if this was about intimacy. About that sentence she'd said weeks ago, the one she thought had evaporated once spoken. I told her it wasn't about a month. It was about what she had made optional and assumed would stay guaranteed. She waited for anger, for accusation, for me to say his name. I didn't. I told her I had stepped back because I needed to see what existed without my constant presence holding it together. At home, at work, in us. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted nothing from her right now. That landed hard. She started to explain herself then. Not confessing. Framing. Stress. Pressure. Feeling unseen. I let her speak until she ran out of momentum. When she stopped, I stood up and told her I had an early morning. In the driveway, I sat in my Tesla Model 3 longer than necessary, hands resting on the wheel, letting the quiet seal the moment. I hadn't won anything. I hadn't taken anything from her. I had simply confirmed what I already knew. She wanted reassurance. I was no longer offering it. And for the first time, she understood that whatever was happening wasn't something she could negotiate her way out of. I wasn't leaving, but I wasn't available either. And that was the moment she realized the ground under her feet was no longer solid. Her collapse didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, each one smaller than the last, but closer together. What surprised her wasn't the loss itself. It was how few people noticed. Ethan was reassigned quietly, not fired, not publicly corrected, just moved into a role with less visibility and no informal authority. The company didn't stumble. It adjusted. That realization hit her harder than any accusation could have. Whatever she thought she had helped build had continued without her influence. At home, the house felt different to her now. Not empty. Indifferent. I still lived there. Still spoke to her. Still showed up. But I no longer filled the space with attention. The absence wasn't dramatic enough to fight. It was constant enough to exhaust her. She tried to reinsert herself into routines that no longer waited for her. She suggested meals together. Walks. Small gestures meant to restore familiarity. I didn't refuse. I didn't lean in either. I responded the way someone does when they're already standing somewhere else. Late at night, she watched Hulu alone, volume low, scrolling through memories instead of episodes. I could feel her revisiting moments she had dismissed before. The way I used to ask how her day went and actually wait for the answer. The way I'd handle problems before she even noticed them existed. At the time, it had felt ordinary. Now it surfaced as contrast. She reached out to friends again, this time more directly. The responses were sympathetic but distant. People were busy. People had plans. Support, she learned, has conditions too. One evening, she stood in the doorway of my office and watched me work. Not to interrupt, to witness. Her expression wasn't anger or sadness. It was recognition, arriving too late to be useful. She said she felt like she was losing everything at once. I told her loss isn't what happens when something is taken. It's what happens when you realize what was holding you up is no longer there. That night, I stayed at a hotel without explaining why. Not to punish her. To confirm something for myself. The quiet didn't bother me. The distance didn't feel sharp. It felt honest. When I came back the next day, she looked relieved. Then she saw my face and understood relief wasn't what this was. Her world hadn't collapsed because I left. It collapsed because I stayed exactly where I was and stopped carrying it. And now, for the first time, she was standing in the consequences alone, surrounded by memories that finally made sense. That was the moment she realized I had already moved on. Not away from her. Away from the version of myself that had made this possible. The ending didn't announce itself. It arrived the way real decisions do, without witnesses, without a soundtrack, without urgency. Just clarity. She tried one last time to reset us. Not with apologies. With sincerity. The kind that shows up only after everything else has failed. She spoke slower. Listened longer. For the first time in months, she wasn't performing confidence. She was asking for footing. I watched her carefully. Not to judge. To understand what had changed. She told me she finally saw what she had treated as permanent. The structure. The safety. The way I had carried weight without asking for recognition. She said she understood now why everything else had fallen apart once I stepped back. I believed her. That didn't mean anything went back. Over the next few days, she tried to exist on my terms instead of rewriting them. She gave me space without filling it. Let silence settle without interrupting it. It was different from before. More honest. Less strategic. I noticed. I just didn't respond the way she hoped. On a quiet Saturday, I spent the morning at Home Depot, walking the same aisles I'd memorized weeks earlier. Not fixing anything. Just confirming order. When I came home, she was sitting at the table, hands folded, waiting without expectation. That mattered. She asked if there was still a chance. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted control. Because the answer deserved precision. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. I said if anything was going to exist from here on, it would be something new. Not a repair. Not a continuation. She nodded. No bargaining. No panic. Just acceptance. That mattered more. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't offer reassurance. I told her I would stay, for now, on terms that didn't require me to carry what wasn't mine. That trust wouldn't be rebuilt through words or urgency, but through consistency she didn't control. She understood the condition. I went to bed that night alone by choice, not distance. The house was quiet, not tense, just settled. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't proving anything. I wasn't leaving. I was standing exactly where I chose to be, knowing that whether she stayed or not, I would no longer bend myself into a place where respect was optional. That was the real ending. Not disappearance. Presence, on my terms. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.